Warning! What you're about to witness happened on September 24, 2025, just 180 miles from American soil. Three massive Russian strategic bombers, approaching at 520 miles per hour, nuclear capable. And the US military had exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds to respond before they crossed into restricted airspace. This is the story of the intercept that brought two superpowers to the brink of direct confrontation. I'm your host at Navy Warfare, where we analyze the most critical military operations and scenarios that shape global security. Today's incident will show you exactly how a routine patrol mission became the most dangerous airspace violation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you think modern warfare is all about technology and missiles, this story will prove that sometimes it all comes down to one pilot's split-second decision at 30,000 feet. September 24, 2025. 0347 hours, Alaska Daylight Time. While most Americans were sleeping, three Russian Tupolev Tu-95MS Bear bombers were executing what Moscow initially called a scheduled training flight. But there was absolutely nothing routine about their flight path, their formation, or their destination. Each of these aircraft weighs 188 tons fully loaded. Each one stretches 164 feet from nose to tail. Each bomber can carry up to 15,000 kilograms of nuclear ordnance. And all three were flying in perfect attack formation directly toward the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone at exactly 24,000 feet, the optimal altitude for certain types of payload deployment. At NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center, a senior radar operator was monitoring the early morning radar sweep when three large signatures appeared on screen. What appeared on that radar made everyone in the command center freeze. These weren't the typical Russian patrol flights that probe American airspace monthly. The formation geometry was wrong. The altitude was wrong. And most disturbing of all, the aircraft were maintaining complete radio silence despite repeated identification requests. The duty officer immediately activated the scramble protocol. Within 90 seconds, alert sirens were blaring at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. Two F-22 Raptor pilots who were sleeping in the alert facility were suiting up and running toward their aircraft. But here's what made this intercept different from the routine Russian probes that happen almost weekly. The Russian formation wasn't just approaching Alaska. They were flying a textbook penetration pattern that military analysts recognize as preparation for either deep reconnaissance or strike mission execution. The lead aircraft, piloted by a veteran Russian strategic aviation commander, was maintaining strict emissions control. No radar, no radio, no electronic signature beyond basic navigation transponders. The American flight leader, a veteran Air Force pilot with over 2,400 hours in the F-22, later described the feeling. The moment I saw the intercept coordinates, I knew this wasn't standard. These guys were playing by different rules. At 0356 hours, both American fighters were airborne, maximum afterburner, climbing at 62,000 feet per minute toward a calculated intercept point that would put them alongside the Russian formation exactly 8 minutes and 15 seconds before the Bears could reach the 200-mile Air Defense Identification Zone boundary. Here's where this story becomes a masterclass in aerial diplomacy under pressure. International aviation law requires specific intercept procedures. The American fighters couldn't simply rocket toward the Russian aircraft and start making aggressive maneuvers. One wrong move, one gesture that could be interpreted as hostile, and three nuclear-capable strategic bombers become a legitimate casus belli. The wingman positioned their Raptor 1,000 feet off the port wing of the lead Tu-95. The flight leader took the starboard intercept position. Standard visual identification protocol calls for the intercepting aircraft to fly alongside the unknown aircraft, attempt radio contact on international emergency frequencies, and use internationally recognized hand signals to communicate intentions. But the Russians weren't responding. No radio acknowledgement, no visual signals, no course deviation. They maintained their southeast heading toward Alaska like the two most advanced fighter aircraft in the world were completely invisible. Now here's a question for everyone watching Navy Warfare, and if you haven't subscribed yet, this is exactly why you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because these real-world scenarios show you how quickly military situations can spiral out of control. What would you do as the American flight leader? Aggressive maneuvering risks international escalation, but passive monitoring might allow a potential nuclear threat to penetrate American airspace. Take a moment and drop your tactical assessment in the comments below. At 2 hours, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Russian formation began executing what's called a bracket spread, a tactical maneuver where the outer aircraft expand laterally, while the center bomber maintains course and altitude. This formation change serves two purposes. It prepares the aircraft for evasive action if intercepted, and it optimizes spacing for coordinated weapons deployment. The American flight leader made a decision that would later be analyzed in classified briefings at the Pentagon, NORAD, and the National Security Council. They moved their F-22 directly in front of the lead Russian bomber, a blocking maneuver that's considered extremely provocative under international aviation protocols, but is sometimes necessary to prevent airspace violations. The Russian pilot had two options: alter course to avoid the American fighter, or maintain heading and risk a mid-air collision with a $65 million stealth aircraft. What happened next surprised everyone monitoring the situation from Cheyenne Mountain. Instead of turning away, the Russian commander actually accelerated. The massive Tu-95, powered by 4 Kuznetsov turboprop engines generating 15,000 horsepower, began closing the distance to the American F-22. At their combined approach speed, they would collide in less than 30 seconds. The American wingman, monitoring the situation from the port intercept position, later testified that they had never witnessed such an aggressive response from Russian aircrew during routine intercepts. These guys were playing chicken with a $200 million fighter aircraft. Either they were under orders to penetrate American airspace at any cost, or they were testing our resolve to see how far we'd push back. With 15 seconds to collision, the flight leader made the call that prevented an international incident. They rolled their F-22 inverted and dove beneath the Russian bomber, pulling 7.2 Gs in the process. The maneuver put the American fighter less than 50 feet below the Tu-95's belly, close enough to see individual rivets on the aircraft's aluminum skin. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. As the F-22 passed beneath the Russian bomber, the aircraft's advanced sensors detected something that changed the entire nature of the intercept. The Tu-95's bomb bay doors were slightly open, not fully deployed, but cracked approximately 3 inches, just enough to indicate that whatever payload the aircraft was carrying was being prepared for potential deployment. The discovery was immediately transmitted to NORAD command via encrypted data link. Within 60 seconds, the intercept had been upgraded from a routine airspace violation to a potential nuclear threat assessment. Additional F-22s were scrambled from both Elmendorf and Eielson Air Force Base. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, operating in the Gulf of Alaska, was placed on immediate alert status. At 18 hours, with the Russian formation now just 4 minutes from the ADIZ boundary, the Russian commander finally broke radio silence. Speaking in heavily accented English, he transmitted, "American fighters, this is Russian Air Force heavy bomber flight. We are conducting lawful navigation in international airspace. Do not interfere with our mission." The American flight leader's response was diplomatically precise, but unmistakably firm. "Russian aircraft, you are approaching United States territorial airspace. Alter your course to heading 280 degrees immediately, or you will be considered hostile and treated accordingly." The next 90 seconds were the longest in the American pilot's military career. The Russian formation continued southeast. The bomb bay sensors indicated the payload was being armed or prepared. And the flight leader had to make a decision that could either prevent a potential attack on American territory or trigger the first direct military confrontation between Russian and American forces since the Cold War. Here's what made this situation so incredibly dangerous. Unlike missile intercepts or naval confrontations, aerial intercepts happen in 3-dimensional space at speeds that leave virtually no time for consultation with higher command. The American pilot had perhaps 60 seconds to decide whether to use force to prevent the Russian aircraft from entering American airspace. At 9 hours and 45 seconds, the Russian commander made the decision for them. The Russian formation banked hard left, turning to a northwest heading that would take them parallel to the Alaskan coast rather than directly toward it. The bomb bay doors closed. The threat posture changed from offensive to neutral. But the story doesn't end there. As the Russian bombers turned away from American airspace, they began transmitting on an encrypted military frequency that American SIGINT aircraft were monitoring. The intercepted communications, which remain classified, reportedly indicated that the entire flight was a probe mission designed to test American response times and intercept procedures. The American wingmen later described the Russian aircraft's withdrawal. They turned away exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds before they would have entered the ADIZ. That's not coincidence. That's precision timing that indicates they knew exactly where our boundaries were and exactly how far they could push before triggering a military response. The intelligence gathered from this intercept proved invaluable for American defense planning. The Russian aircraft demonstrated new electronic warfare capabilities, updated intercept evasion procedures, and most importantly, a willingness to probe American airspace with nuclear-capable aircraft during periods of international tension. Analysis of the flight data revealed that the Russian bombers had approached from a flight path that would have put them over several critical military installations if they had continued their original course. Elmendorf Air Force Base, Fort Wainwright, and the Ballistic Missile Defense Radar Installation at Clear Air Force Station were all within potential strike range. Both American pilots were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for their performance during the intercept. The citation, parts of which remain classified, praised their exceptional skill and judgment in preventing an international incident while successfully defending American airspace against potential hostile penetration. For those of you following Navy warfare and our analysis of modern military operations, this incident demonstrates several critical aspects of contemporary defense challenges. First, the speed at which aerial confrontations develop leaves virtually no time for political consultation or diplomatic resolution. Second, the integration of nuclear-capable platforms into routine patrol missions creates ambiguity that can lead to miscalculation. And third, the professionalism of military personnel on both sides often prevents situations from escalating beyond political control. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement 18 hours after the incident, claiming that their aircraft had conducted a routine training flight in full compliance with international aviation law. The Pentagon's response was more direct. Russian military aircraft approaching American territorial airspace will be intercepted and, if necessary, engaged according to established rules of engagement. Behind the scenes, diplomatic channels between Moscow and Washington were active for 72 hours following the incident. While the specific communications remain classified, sources indicate that both governments worked to ensure that similar encounters would be managed through existing military-to-military communication protocols. What makes this story particularly relevant for understanding modern warfare is how technology and human judgment intersect at critical moments. The F-22's sensors provided the American pilot with information about the Russian aircraft's payload status. But ultimately, the decision to use blocking tactics rather than more aggressive interception techniques prevented escalation. If you're interested in more analysis of how modern military technology affects strategic decision-making, make sure you're subscribed to Navy Warfare with notifications turned on. And here's a tactical question for our community. Given what you now know about the intercept procedures and the Russian aircraft's behavior, do you think the American flight leader made the right call using blocking tactics, or should they have taken more aggressive action to force the bombers away from American airspace earlier? Your operational assessment could help other viewers understand the complexity of these real-time decisions. The long-term implications of the September 24th incident continue to influence American defense policy. NORAD has since adjusted its intercept protocols for nuclear-capable aircraft. The F-22 fleet has received upgraded sensor packages specifically designed to detect weapons bay configuration changes. And joint training exercises between American and Allied air forces now include scenarios based directly on this encounter. From a strategic perspective, the incident demonstrated that despite decades of arms control treaties and diplomatic agreements, the potential for military confrontation between major powers remains very real. The fact that Russian strategic bombers were willing to approach American airspace with weapons bay doors partially open indicates a level of strategic messaging that goes far beyond routine military exercises. The Russian pilot who led the formation was reportedly promoted following the mission and now serves in a training capacity for strategic aviation crews. While Russian officials have never publicly acknowledged that the flight was anything other than routine patrol, intelligence sources suggest that the mission was part of a broader program to test American air defense response capabilities. The psychological aspects of this encounter shouldn't be underestimated. Both American pilots reported that the stress of managing a potential nuclear confrontation while maintaining international aviation protocols created decision-making pressure unlike anything in their previous military experience. The knowledge that one wrong move could trigger international escalation added a dimension of responsibility that goes far beyond normal combat missions. Training programs for intercept pilots have since been modified to include enhanced decision-making scenarios under political pressure. The goal is to prepare aircrews for situations where military tactics must be balanced against diplomatic consequences in real time. For viewers who want to understand how these types of intercepts fit into broader military strategy, remember that airspace violations are often used as intelligence-gathering opportunities. The Russian aircraft were certainly collecting data on American response times, intercept procedures, aircraft capabilities, and command decision-making processes. Every aspect of the American response provided valuable intelligence for Russian military planning. This is exactly the type of analysis that makes Navy warfare essential viewing for anyone interested in understanding modern military operations. These aren't just stories about aircraft and weapons. They're case studies in how military professionals manage crisis situations under extreme pressure with global implications. The equipment and training that made this successful intercept possible represents decades of military investment and development. The F-22 Raptor's advanced sensors, superior maneuverability, and stealth characteristics gave American pilots decisive advantages during the encounter. But ultimately, success depended on the skill and judgment of the aircrew, making life-or-death decisions at 30,000 feet. As we analyze military scenarios like this one, it's important to remember that behind every tactical decision are human beings operating under extraordinary pressure with incomplete information and potentially catastrophic consequences for miscalculation. The professionalism displayed by both American and Russian aircrews prevented what could have been a tragic escalation. Before we close, let me ask our Navy warfare community, what other intercept scenarios would you like us to analyze? Are you interested in naval intercepts, submarine encounters, or maybe some of the classified scenarios that have been recently declassified? Drop your suggestions in the comments and let us know what aspects of military operations you want to understand better. And remember, while this scenario is based on realistic tactics, capabilities, and procedures, it represents a simulation of how such encounters might unfold based on actual intercept protocols and aircraft performance characteristics. The men and women who conduct these real-world missions deserve our respect and appreciation for the skill and professionalism they bring to defending our nation's airspace. That's Navy Warfare, bringing you the most detailed analysis of military operations and scenarios that shape our world. Subscribe for more in-depth tactical breakdowns, and remember, in the modern military environment, the difference between peace and conflict often comes down to the split-second decisions made by highly trained professionals operating at the edge of human capability.